The crash happened so fast Ethan Hayes barely had time to register the ship's proximity warnings before impact. One moment he'd been charting a course around Vihira's gravitational field, adhering to the galactic quarantine restrictions, and the next, his systems had gone haywire, pulling him toward the planet's surface like a moth to flame. Now, as consciousness slowly returned, Ethan found himself staring up at an alien sky, the twin suns of Vihira bathing everything in a golden-amber glow. His body felt like one massive bruise, and the bitter taste of emergency med-foam lingered in his mouth. His ship, or what remained of it, smoldered several meters away, half buried in the bioluminescent flora that carpeted the landscape. "Fantastic," he groaned, trying to sit up. "Command's going to have my license for this." A sharp pain in his ribs forced him back down. Vihira was classified as a Class X restricted planet. No landings, no scans, no contact of any kind. The last scientific expedition, nearly 30 Earth years ago, had ended with all but one of the researchers dead. The survivors' report had been deemed too disturbing for public release and had led to the immediate quarantine. And now Ethan was here, breathing its air, bleeding on its soil. His emergency beacon chirped feebly nearby, its signal too weak to penetrate the planet's unusual atmospheric interference. He'd need to boost the signal somehow or... A soft rustle in the undergrowth interrupted his thoughts. Ethan froze, recalling the survival briefing warnings about Vihira's predatory fauna. With excruciating effort, he reached for the pulse pistol at his hip, only to find an empty holster. The foliage parted, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She emerged like a spirit from the luminous vegetation, tall and lithe, with skin the color of jade leaves. Her hair, a cascade of fiery orange copper strands, framed a face of alien beauty. Two large, expressive eyes the color of amethysts regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Her ears, elegantly pointed, bore intricate markings that seemed to shimmer as they caught the light. She wore a garment fashioned from what appeared to be living plants and crystalline fragments, moving and adjusting with her body as if sentient. "I mean no harm," Ethan managed, raising his hands slowly, wincing at the pain this caused. Universal translation protocols were standard for explorers, but he had no idea if they would work here. To his surprise, she responded in a melodic, accented version of standard galactic. "You are injured, Skyfallen One." It wasn't a question. She approached with fluid grace, kneeling beside him. Up close, Ethan noticed her skin had subtle, almost imperceptible patterns like the veins of a leaf. "I shouldn't be here," he explained, suddenly very aware of the quarantine violation. "My ship was pulled off course." "Vihira called you?" she said simply, as if this explained everything. Her fingers, long and slender with an extra joint, hovered over his injuries. "I am Kalina, healer of the Thorn Grove clan." Before Ethan could respond, her fingertips brushed his forehead, and an extraordinary sensation rippled through him, warmth and coolness simultaneously, pain receding like tide waters. Where their skin touched, the ground beneath them responded, tiny filaments of light spreading outward in a circular pattern. Kalina jerked her hand away suddenly, her purple eyes widening. The light pattern faded immediately. "That is unusual," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "What just happened?" Ethan asked, noticing he could now sit up without pain. Kalina stood, taking several steps back. "You should not have come here, no sky dwellers should." Her voice carried both warning and regret. "Vihira reacts to outsiders, too, connections between different kinds." "I'm Ethan," he offered, slowly standing. "And believe me, I didn't plan to crash on a forbidden planet." Her expression softened slightly. "Night approaches quickly. The luminous predators will emerge soon. You cannot stay here." She hesitated, conflict evident in her features. "I will shelter you until dawn, then you must try to leave this world." "My ship won't fly in its current condition." Kalina's gaze traveled to the wreckage. "Then we face a problem, Ethan of the Sky. The longer you remain, the more Vihira will notice." As if in response to her words, the ground trembled slightly. Nearby plants seemed to turn toward them, their glow intensifying. "Notice," Ethan repeated. Kalina reached for his arm, but stopped just short of touching him again. "Follow me, closely. Do not touch anything living, which is nearly everything here." She began moving with practiced steps along what appeared to be a natural path. And Ethan. "Yes. If you feel drawn to me, resist it. Such connections on Vihira have consequences neither of us would survive. With that cryptic warning, she led him deeper into the alien forest, as the planet itself seemed to watch their every move. 3 days had passed since Ethan's crash landing, and each moment on Vihira felt like walking on a knife's edge. Kalina had hidden him in a hollow beneath the roots of an enormous tree-like structure at the outskirts of her clan's territory. The space was surprisingly comfortable, illuminated by bioluminescent fungi that dimmed in response to their fatigue, another reminder of how eerily responsive the planet's ecosystem was. "Your ship requires materials I cannot provide," Kalina said, examining the damaged navigation core that Ethan had salvaged. Her fingers hovered just above the technology, careful not to touch it directly. She'd been equally careful to avoid touching him since that first encounter. "If I can boost the signal's strength on my emergency beacon, my people will come," Ethan replied, trying not to stare at the mesmerizing patterns that shifted subtly beneath her jade skin when she concentrated. "Your people will die if they come," she said plainly, "just as your kind did before." Ethan set down his tools. "Tell me about that. What happened to the research team?" Kalina's purple eyes darkened. "They formed attachments to my people," Vihira responded. "It began with small tremors, then toxic blooms, then," she gestured vaguely. "The planet turned against them, against us all." "But why?" "We believe Vihira is conscious in ways you cannot understand. It perceives connections between different species as invasive, a threat to its balance." She looked away. "My mother was one who loved a sky dweller. I watched her waste away after he died in the planetary response." The revelation hung heavy between them, making the air feel thick and charged. "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly, instinctively reaching toward her before catching himself. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. The fungi around them pulsed brighter, and a low vibration rumbled through the ground. "We should work separately," Kalina said abruptly, standing and moving to the entrance of their shelter. "I will gather materials from the eastern groves." Alone with his thoughts, Ethan tried to focus on repairs, but his mind kept drifting back to Kalina, to her voice, her movements, the knowledge in her eyes. Something about her called to him in ways he couldn't rationalize. When she returned hours later, a storm had gathered above the forest. The air crackled with strange energy that made Ethan's hair stand on end. "The elders are growing suspicious," Kalina said, her voice tight with worry. "They sense disturbances in Vihira's patterns. We must work faster." As she set down her gathered materials, crystalline fragments and fibrous plant matter that might serve as conductor replacements, their fingers accidentally brushed. A shock passed between them, not unpleasant but intense, like diving into a cold pool on a hot day. The ground beneath them immediately responded, sending up spirals of light that wrapped around their ankles. Nearby, a cluster of closed flower-like organisms suddenly bloomed, releasing glowing spores that drifted around them like stars. Neither of them pulled away. Ethan found himself mesmerized by the sensation, by her proximity, by the way her breath quickened. "We shouldn't," Kalina whispered, but she moved closer. "Tell me to stop," Ethan replied, his hand slowly rising to her face. The storm outside intensified, lightning in impossible colors forking across the sky. "My people have a belief," she said, her voice barely audible above the gathering tempest, "that when two souls are pulled together against all wisdom, it is because they are meant to change the pattern of things." His fingertips made contact with her cheek, and the sensation was overwhelming, a rush of warmth and connection that felt like coming home after being lost for years. The ground beneath them trembled, and the walls of their shelter began to pulse with increasing light. "Is this worth dying for?" she asked, even as she leaned into his touch. In answer, Ethan closed the distance between them. Their lips met, and the world around them exploded into chaos. The plants surrounding their shelter contorted and grew at impossible speeds, twisting and reshaping. The ground heaved beneath them, and in the distance, a chorus of alarm calls echoed from Kalina's village. Yet neither could bring themselves to break away. Something profound had awakened between them, something that felt more essential than survival itself. When they finally separated, both gasping for breath, Kalina's eyes were wide with wonder and fear. "It's happening already," she whispered. "Vihira is responding." Ethan looked around at the transformed environment, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Then we need to understand why. There has to be a reason the planet reacts this way. Kalina's expression grew solemn. According to our oldest stories, there is, and if they're true, what we've just begun may doom us all. Outside, the storm raged on, and the very soil beneath their feet continued to pulse with light, as if the heart of the planet itself had awakened and found its rhythm matched to their own. The days following their first kiss brought changes that were impossible to ignore. The forest around their shelter had transformed dramatically, plants growing in unnatural formations, new species emerging overnight. Some flora bloomed with intoxicating fragrances when Ethan and Kalina were near each other, while others developed sharp thorns that seemed to track their movements. "The village council has called for me," Kalina said one morning, her voice tight with anxiety. She wore a ceremonial cloak of living vines that shifted uneasily against her green skin. "They've observed the anomalies. They know someone is causing disruptions." Ethan looked up from the beacon he'd been modifying with crystalline components Kalina had provided. "Will you tell them about me?" "I must," she replied, touching a finger to the intricate markings on her pointed ears. A gesture Ethan had learned indicated deep thought. "Hiding truth from the elders is impossible. Vihira speaks to them." He stood, instinctively reaching for her hand. When their fingers intertwined, the ground beneath them illuminated with fractal patterns of light that spread outward. Neither pulled away anymore. These planetary responses had become a beautiful, terrifying aspect of their growing bond. "I'll go with you," he said. Kalina's amethyst eyes widened. "That would be dangerous. More dangerous than staying here alone while the planet's reactions intensify." He gestured to a cluster of new growth that had appeared overnight, pools pods that leaked a glowing sap when they were near. "Something is happening, Kalina, and I think we need to understand it together." Their journey to the Thorn Grove settlement took them through landscapes transforming before their eyes. Familiar paths had rerouted themselves, and several times they encountered barriers of newly grown thorny vines that retreated only when Kalina spoke to them in her native tongue. They arrived at sunset to find the village in disarray. The living structures, dwellings grown from symbiotic relationships with the planet's flora, were behaving erratically, changing colors and shapes without guidance from their caretakers. Kalina's people moved about with clear anxiety, their green skin patterns flashing with distress signals. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Children with copper hair and purple eyes pointed and whispered. Adults recoiled, their postures defensive. An elderly female with elaborate ear markings stepped forward, her movements deliberate and graceful despite apparent age. "Kalina of the healer lineage," she spoke, her voice resonating oddly as if multiple voices layered beneath hers. "You bring the catalyst into our sanctuary." "Elder Thaxia," Kalina bowed respectfully but kept her hand firmly in Ethan's. "This is Ethan Hayes. His vessel crashed. I have been helping him repair it." "You have been doing far more than that," another elder said sharply, gesturing to the ground beneath them, where light continued to spread in intricate patterns from where they stood. "The ancient warnings speak of this. The poison bloom begins." "Poison bloom?" Ethan asked. Elder Thaxia approached, her gaze analytical. "When two worlds connect too intimately, Vihira defends itself. The changes you see are merely the beginning." She gestured toward the horizon where ominous clouds had begun to gather. "Already the atmospheric composition shifts. Soon come the storms that eat flesh. Then the ground will split, releasing the deep spores." "The research team," Ethan realized, "that's what happened to them." "Some formed bonds with our people," another elder confirmed. "Bonds beyond mere alliance. The planet reacted as it always does, first with beauty, then with death." Kalina stepped forward. "But there must be more to understand, my mother." "Your mother's tragedy should have taught you caution," Thaxia snapped, her composure breaking momentarily. "She defied our warnings, loved an outsider, and paid with her life when Vihira responded, as did many others." A tremor ran through the ground, stronger than any before. In the center of the village, a massive structure resembling a flower bud suddenly erupted from the soil, growing rapidly until it towered above them. As they watched, it began to open, revealing crystalline structures inside that captured and refracted the fading sunlight. "The warning bloom," Thaxia whispered, fear evident in her voice. "It has not appeared for 3 generations." She turned to the gathering villagers. "Prepare evacuation protocols. The deep chambers must be readied." The village erupted into coordinated activity. Ethan pulled Kalina aside as her people rushed to collect essentials. "There has to be a way to stop this," he insisted. "Every biological system has balance points, feedback mechanisms." Kalina's expression was troubled. "Our histories tell of only one coupling between worlds that did not end in disaster. Ancient texts speak of harmony found through complete surrender, but the meaning is unclear." A bolt of energy, not quite lightning, struck the ground nearby, leaving a smoking crater that immediately filled with a bubbling, iridescent liquid. Kalina, an older male, approached rapidly. "The council demands you both attend. We must perform the separation rite." "Separation rite?" Ethan questioned. The man, who resembled Kalina enough to be a relative, looked at him with a mixture of pity and anger. "A ceremony to sever the connection between your energies. It is painful and not always successful, but it is the only chance to slow Vihira's defense response." As they followed toward a central structure, Kalina squeezed Ethan's hand. "My father speaks from experience," she whispered. "He performed this rite with my mother and her sky dweller. It only made things worse." "Then why attempt it?" Ethan asked. Her expression darkened. "Because the alternative is to watch you die, along with anyone near us." She looked up at the swirling clouds gathering above them. "The poison bloom progresses quickly once it begins." Around them, the village continued to transform, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Plants grew with impossible speed, some developing structures that resembled organs, eyes, mouths, listening appendages. The very air felt charged with potential. As they entered the council chamber, dozens of wary eyes turned toward them. In the center of the room stood a platform of living crystal that pulsed with its own internal light. "The severance must be performed immediately," Thaxia announced, "before the bond strengthens further." Ethan looked at Kalina, seeing fear in her eyes but also something else, a resolve that matched the growing certainty in his own heart. "And if we refuse?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent chamber. The crystal platform flared in response to his words, and a new tremor, stronger than any before, shook the entire structure. Thaxia's expression was grim. "Then you condemn us all." The separation ritual left Ethan feeling hollow, as if a vital part of him had been surgically removed. For 3 hours, he and Kalina had been positioned at opposite ends of the crystal platform while the elders performed their ancient rites, chanting in a language even his translator couldn't decipher, applying sacred oils that burned like acid, and finally placing a crystalline barrier between them that supposedly disrupted their energetic connection. Now, sequestered in different parts of the village, they were forbidden from seeing each other. Ethan had been given quarters in an isolated structure at the village's edge, a simple dwelling that seemed to recoil from his touch, its living walls contracting whenever he came too close. "The symptoms will fade with time," Elder Thaxia had assured him, though the pity in her eyes suggested otherwise. "The emptiness, the physical pain, these are merely echoes of the severed bond." But 5 days had passed, and Ethan felt worse, not better. A persistent fever made his skin feel too tight. His vision blurred periodically, and no amount of water could quench his thirst. Through his dwelling's single window, he could see the warning bloom continuing to grow at the village center, now towering over 30 meters high. Most troubling of all, despite the separation, Vihira's reactions hadn't diminished. If anything, they'd intensified. The storms circling above dumped rain that sizzled against certain surfaces. New species of predatory plants had emerged around the village perimeter, their movements clearly purposeful. Several villagers had already been evacuated to the underground chambers after suffering exposure to airborne toxins. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Ethan opened the door to find Kalina's father, Thorin. "How do you fare, Sky Dweller?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "Like I'm dying," Ethan answered honestly. "And your daughter?" Thorin's face tightened. "The same. She hides it well, but the healers cannot mask her suffering." He glanced over his shoulder before continuing in a lower voice. "The elders believe the separation did not take hold properly. They speak of more drastic measures." "What measures?" "Your permanent removal from Vihira." Thorin's hand moved to a ceremonial blade at his hip, but he didn't draw it. "Some advocate for your death, believing it would end the connection completely." Ethan leaned against the doorframe for support. "Would it work?" "No," Thorin's certainty surprised him. When my wife, Sky Dweller, died, it only accelerated the planetary response. She followed him soon after. His fingers traced the intricate patterns on his ears, so similar to Kalina's. I have come to believe our understanding of Vihira's reaction is fundamentally flawed. A distant rumble shook the ground, and they both looked toward the center of the village where a crowd was gathering. Come, Thorin said urgently. The council has called an emergency session. If we hurry, you may see Kalina before they notice. They made their way through the village, Ethan struggling to maintain his balance as waves of dizziness washed over him. The environmental changes were now impossible to ignore. The very air had taken on a purplish hue, and each breath felt thick with microscopic particles that made his lungs burn. At the council chambers, they slipped in through a side entrance. The room was packed with villagers, their jade skin patterns pulsing with anxious signals, and there, across the chamber, stood Kalina. Even from a distance, Ethan could see how the separation had affected her. Her vibrant copper hair had dulled, and her posture was hunched with obvious pain. When their eyes met across the crowded space, the effect was immediate and electric. A visible pulse of energy passed between them, causing the crystal fixtures in the room to flare brilliantly. Several villagers gasped, moving away from both of them. Elder Thaxia, who had been addressing the gathering, stopped mid-sentence. "The separation has failed," she announced grimly, "and now we have proof that traditional measures will not suffice." Before anyone could react, Kalina broke protocol and spoke out. "The measures fail because our understanding is incomplete." Her voice, though weakened, carried conviction. "I've been studying our oldest texts. They speak not of severing connections, but of transforming them." "Silence," another elder commanded. "You are compromised by your attachment." "No," Kalina insisted, taking a step forward despite her obvious pain. "I am illuminated by it. The pain we feel isn't from our connection, it's from fighting against it." She gestured toward the windows where the warning bloom was visible. "Look at its structure. It's not defending against invasion, it's responding to discord." Murmurs spread through the gathering. Ethan felt something resonating within him at her words, a truth he somehow recognized. "The ancient text speaks of harmony found through complete surrender," Kalina continued. "I believe Vihira doesn't reject our bond, it rejects our resistance to it. Every attempt to sever or deny our connection creates dissonance that the planet cannot tolerate." Elder Thaxia's expression showed skepticism, but also a reluctant curiosity. "What evidence supports this theory?" "The timing of the environmental changes," Ethan said, finding strength to join the conversation. All eyes turned to him. "The most violent reactions didn't occur when we connected, they happened when we tried to pull apart. When we embraced our feelings, the changes were beautiful, if unsettling. It was only after the separation ritual that the truly dangerous phenomena began." A tremendous tremor shook the chamber, stronger than any before. Crystalline fixtures shattered, raining shards upon the assembly. Outside, a chasm opened in the ground, venting steam and spores. "We have little time," Thaxia acknowledged, her authority momentarily set aside in the face of imminent disaster. "What do you propose?" Kalina moved toward Ethan, each step visibly painful for both of them. "We must do the opposite of separation, a complete joining, not just of bodies but of essence, a surrender to what Vihira is trying to create through us." They stood before each other now, the air between them shimmering with visible energy. The pain of their enforced separation was almost unbearable at this proximity, yet something deeper pulled them together, something that felt right despite all warnings to the contrary. "It could kill you both," Thorin warned, though his tone held no condemnation. "We're already dying," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Kalina's. "At least this way we choose our fate." The ground beneath them began to glow, spreading outward in the now familiar pattern. But this time, instead of fighting it, they embraced it. Ethan reached for Kalina's hands, and as their fingers intertwined, the light intensified, enveloping them both. "Whatever happens," Kalina whispered, her voice stronger now despite the chaos around them, "know that finding you was worth it." The warning bloom outside suddenly shifted, its petals changing from threatening crimson to a softer, pulsing blue. The tremors continued, but somehow they felt different, less destructive, more transformative. "Look," someone shouted. Through the windows, they could see new growth erupting across the village. But unlike before, these formations weren't twisted or dangerous. They were harmonious, integrated, as if the planet had found a new pattern to follow. "It's working," Ethan breathed, feeling strength returning to his body where moments before there had been only pain. Kalina smiled, the light in her eyes rekindling. "Not yet, but it will, if we're brave enough to see it through." Around them, the chamber began to transform, the very architecture responding to their reunited presence. And for the first time since the crisis began, the changes felt not like a defense against them, but like an embrace welcoming them home. The council chamber had transformed around them, its walls now pulsing with veins of light that matched the rhythm of their heartbeats. Ethan and Kalina stood at its center, their entwined hands creating a nexus of energy that spread throughout the village. For 3 days and nights, they had remained there, barely speaking, barely moving, existing in a state of profound connection that transcended physical touch. Elder Thaxia approached cautiously, the skepticism in her eyes now replaced with wonder. "The deep chambers stand empty," she reported. "All evacuees have returned, the toxic emissions have ceased." "And the warning bloom?" Kalina asked, her voice carrying an unusual resonance as if multiple tones harmonized within it. "Changed," Thaxia replied. "It no longer warns, it communicates." She gestured to a group of younger clan members who had taken to studying the massive structure. "They say it speaks in patterns of light and chemical releases, patterns that match the rhythms you two generate." Ethan felt Kalina's essence intertwined with his own, a sensation beyond physical awareness. Since their decision to fully embrace their connection, the boundaries between them had become increasingly permeable. He could sense her thoughts as whispers in his mind. She could feel his emotions as currents in her blood. "We need to go to it," Ethan said, certain of this though he couldn't explain why. The villagers parted as they walked through the settlement, still hand in hand. The transformation of Vihira around them was breathtaking. Where once toxic growths had erupted, now flourished new species of plants with healing properties. The atmospheric disturbances had settled into gentle, iridescent mists that nourished rather than burned. Even the predatory flora had transmuted into protective sentinels that stood watch around the village perimeter. At the base of the warning bloom, now called the Communion Bloom by many villagers, they paused. Up close, its massive structure resembled a cathedral of living crystal and organic matter, towering nearly 50 meters above them. Its translucent petals flexed and shifted, creating ever-changing patterns of refracted light. "What happens now?" Thaxia asked, having followed with several other elders and Kalina's father. "Complete surrender," Kalina replied, looking at Ethan with eyes that now contained flecks of gold among the purple, a physical manifestation of their blending essences. As the ancient texts foretold. They approached the Bloom Center, where an opening had formed like an invitation. Inside was a chamber of pulsing tissue and crystal, creating a space that felt both alien and intimately familiar. "Are you afraid?" Ethan asked Kalina, speaking aloud though he could feel her answer in his mind already. She smiled, the patterns beneath her jade skin flowing in complex designs that matched his own accelerated heartbeat. "Not of this," she replied. "Only of what might have been if we hadn't found each other." They stepped into the chamber together, the opening sealed behind them, cutting off the murmurs of the watching crowd. Inside, the air was thick with particulates that glowed like suspended stars. The walls pulsed with a heartbeat, Vihira's own rhythm, Ethan somehow knew. "I think this is a symbiotic organ," he said with sudden understanding. "The planet created it specifically for us." Kalina nodded, releasing his hand to explore the chamber. Where her fingers touched the walls, ripples of light followed. "My people have always known Vihira was conscious, but we never understood its true nature. It doesn't fear connection between species. It seeks to facilitate it, but only when that connection is genuine and complete." The chamber floor began to shift beneath them, forming a reclining surface that invited them to lie down. As they settled onto it, the material molded perfectly to their bodies. The previous connections failed because they were held back by fear, Ethan realized. The researchers, your mother's Sky Dweller, they tried to maintain separation even while connecting. "And Vihira cannot abide dissonance," Kalina finished his thought. "It requires harmony, complete integration." The chamber's pulsations intensified, and tendrils of luminous material extended from the walls, gently touching their skin. Where they made contact, sensations of profound pleasure and connection flowed through them both. "It wants to be part of our bond," Kalina whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A third consciousness in our connection. Ethan reached for her, understanding intuitively what must happen next. Then let's invite it in. Their lips met in a kiss that transcended physical sensation. The chamber responded immediately, enveloping them in a cocoon of light and sensation that amplified every touch, every emotion between them. The barriers between their separate consciousnesses grew thinner still, until Ethan couldn't distinguish where his thoughts ended and Kalina's began. Into this merged awareness came a third presence, ancient, vast, and curious. Vihira itself, reaching through the bloom to join their communion. Its consciousness was unlike anything either had experienced, not thoughts as humans or Kalina's people understood them, but patterns, rhythms, and connections spanning billions of years. Their joining was both physical and transcendent. As their bodies entwined within the chamber, their minds expanded into Vihira's awareness, experiencing the planet not as a place, but as a living entity with purposes and desires of its own. Through this expanded consciousness, they understood at last, Vihira hadn't been trying to destroy their connection, but to perfect it, to make it complete in ways neither species had imagined possible. Hours or days later, time had little meaning within their shared consciousness. Ethan and Kalina emerged from the bloom. The waiting villagers gasped at their transformation. Ethan's skin now bore subtle patterns like Kalina's, though his remained human in color. Kalina's pointed ears had developed new markings that pulsed with light. Most striking were their eyes, both now sharing the same purple-gold irises, as if their genetic codes had begun a gradual melding. "You've changed," Thorin observed, approaching his daughter with wonder rather than fear. "We all have," Kalina replied, her hand finding Ethan's again. "And so has Vihira." Elder Thaxia and the council approached cautiously. "The planet has stabilized," Thaxia said. "The destructive phenomena have ceased entirely, but what exactly has happened here?" Ethan smiled, feeling Kalina's thoughts harmonizing with his own as they prepared to explain. "Evolution," he said simply. "Vihira has been seeking this for millennia, a true symbiosis between different worlds. Previous attempts failed because the connections were incomplete, held back by fear and separation. We are the first to fully surrender to it," Kalina continued. "And in doing so, we've established a new pattern, a template for others to follow." Others, an elder questioned. "Vihira wants more," Ethan confirmed. "More connections, more integration between species. It's been calling to the stars for eons, pulling visitors here to attempt this symbiosis." The implications stunned the council into silence. Finally, Thaxia spoke again. "Then the quarantine should end," Kalina finished. "But carefully, gradually. Only those truly ready for complete connection should come. Vihira will know which ones are prepared." As if in response to her words, Ethan's emergency beacon, long forgotten in the chaos, suddenly activated, its signal cutting cleanly through the atmospheric interference that had blocked it before. "Perfect timing," Ethan smiled. "We have a lot to explain to my people." "They won't understand immediately," Kalina cautioned. "No," he agreed, pulling her close, "but we'll help them learn together." Above them, the communion bloom released a cloud of luminous spores that drifted across the village and beyond, carrying the template of their successful bonding throughout Vihira's ecosystem. Where they landed, new growth emerged, beautiful and harmonious. That night, as they lay together beneath twin moons, their bodies and minds still resonating with their shared connection to each other and to Vihira, Kalina traced the new patterns that had formed on Ethan's skin. "The elders have examined the ancient texts more thoroughly," she said. "They found references to this, the eternal bloom, they called it, a permanent change in Vihira's nature, triggered when true harmony between worlds is achieved." "And what happens next in those texts?" Ethan asked, though he already sensed the answer through their bond. Kalina smiled, her eyes reflecting starlight. "They don't say, we're writing that part ourselves." Around them, Vihira pulsed with new life and possibility. No longer a forbidden world of deadly secrets, but a sanctuary for those brave enough to surrender completely to connection. Their love, once feared as poison, had bloomed into something miraculous instead, a template for evolution that would eventually reach across the stars. "I'm glad your ship crashed here," Kalina whispered against his lips. Ethan smiled, feeling Vihira's consciousness brushing against their joined awareness like a contented sigh. "It wasn't an accident," he replied. "We were always meant to find each other." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Perhaps another visitor being called home to Vihira, where impossible connections flourished and love between worlds was no longer forbidden, but celebrated as the miracle of evolution it truly was.